general statement on training philosophy would be that you should train in a way that's appropriate to your purpose. So in other words, train to what you're trying to achieve.
You're listening to the Ethos Athletes podcast, where we believe that your health is the number one resource you need to accomplish your dreams. My name is Dr. Matthew Hernandez, and I'm a physician dedicated to helping my patients maintain their active lifestyle and continue doing what they love. I'm sitting down with other experts so that we can provide our listeners with the knowledge they need to improve their health and live their best life. Hey everyone, this is Dr. Matt, and you're listening to the Ethos Athletes podcast. Today we're going to be starting our series on how to weight train properly. So in the past, we've done podcast episodes on the importance of weight training for your health, for your brain health, just anti-aging properties, all those different things. Weight training is good for a number of different things. And one of the follow-up questions that we've had for that is, well, how do I know if I'm training properly? And so for this particular series, I brought in August Schmidt, who is the owner of East Valley CrossFit and Iron Athlete Clinic, as well as the president of the Arizona Weightlifting Organization. August's background is extensive in the world of weight training, and so I wanted to bring him in to really shed some light on how to properly weight train and the different things that we can be doing for that. So August, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Matt.
So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your background and how you became so involved in the weight training world?
Well, that goes back a long way. Even when I was pretty young, I was interested in strength training. I remember, I think it was in middle school, I found a 35-pound York dumbbell somewhere and had that under my bed and would do exercises with that. Once I got into high school, then obviously got exposed to a lot more strength training. You know, at that time, that was late 80s. So the schools had weight rooms at that point, and we're starting to do some more organized strength training. Really fell in love with it at that age and was always interested in trying to figure out how to do it more effectively, how to do it better. All through school, I did that. I went to Auburn University, kind of just trained on my own at that point. Played rugby there, did track my freshman year, and then played rugby. But always maintained a gym membership at Kaz's gym, Bill Kazmaier's gym.
Okay.
And we trained more kind of like a bodybuilding style at that time. We didn't really know anything else. You know, we'd reading magazines and trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
That was back when you kind of had to like mail order any kind of books or anything you wanted to get. That was right as the internet was starting to become a thing, but it really wasn't too much. I didn't start using email until after college.
Okay. Don't date yourself here, August. Come on.
So after I graduated from Auburn, went and became a teacher in Jacksonville, Florida, and had good success coaching wrestling. And the football coach saw one of the athletes that became a state champion that year and saw that we had done a lot of extra strength training and approached me about doing that for the football team. So that's kind of how I got to the point of working as a strength and conditioning coach. Then I moved out to San Diego, worked at the University of San Diego as an assistant in their weight room. Moved here to Arizona. That was about 2002.
Okay.
And worked again as a strength coach in schools out here. And then in 2009, opened East Valley CrossFit, and it's kind of gone from there. We have weightlifting at the gym. We also had very competitive CrossFit athletes. That's changed quite a bit in the last couple of years with regionals not being a thing really anymore. But yeah, it kind of all blends together. A lot of what we do in CrossFit is the same movements or similar movements to what we were doing in strength and conditioning, just applied a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. So it's been fun to learn and have a lot of what I thought I knew change.
Yeah.
You know, it's because it was a lot of the textbook strength and conditioning stuff. And then you start seeing people having success doing other things, and you kind of have to go back and, well, maybe that's not a hard and fast rule.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something else going on here.
Yeah.
And the CrossFit kind of made me look at training in more of a holistic approach, or more of a systemic for the whole body, rather than isolation or breaking everything into independent silos. You know, your conditioning, your strength, you know, all the different pieces that you can break it into.
Yeah.
And blending them and still getting good results, because traditionally it was kind of treated like you had to separate them.
Yeah. And I would agree, based on my experience of from the stuff that I've seen, you know, as the industry has progressed. Yeah, it was very separated.
It forced me to rethink a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things or examples that I like to give of it is once CrossFit became highly competitive and matured some as a sport, you started seeing athletes that could snatch in the range of 300 pounds and run sub 6-minute miles, somewhere in the 5 minutes. And they could do both those things. And
Yeah.
they could do both those things in the same day.
Yeah.
Prior to that, I don't think that we saw anybody doing that. And I think the reason we didn't see anyone doing it was because there was no reason to do it. If you were training as a weightlifter, that was who was snatching 300 pounds plus. That's all you needed to do. If you were training as a runner, you mainly ran. You maybe did some strength training, but you certainly did an Olympic lift or to the degree that would get you to a snatch that was 300 pounds. So CrossFit kind of brought those two things together to see how far we can push this limit with contrary adaptations. Because the adaptations to run a, sub 6 or a 5-minute mile are significantly different than the adaptations required to snatch 300 pounds.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it was pretty much totally separate prior to that. And so
Okay.
that really took a while to wrap my brain around doing that and seeing what athletes could do simultaneously rather than separated off. So that was interesting. And then the amount of work that the athletes could do, the volume they could tolerate was another thing that was a little bit, I had to change my thoughts on quite a bit.
Okay.
It was, I think, 2013 or 14, training a team, getting ready for regionals. And I pushed the volume up, figured, okay, we'll push the volume up. We'll run them, we'll get them overtrained, overreach a little bit. Then we'll, a couple weeks out, start tapering them down and they'll recover. Well, a few weeks into the higher volume, harder training, I was talking to them, trying to get a feel for where they're at. And they were telling me we feel better.
Nice.
And I was like, okay, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, those kind of things it forced me just to look at it and say, well, maybe the stuff that I thought I knew or that I had read isn't as set in stone as I thought it was.
Yeah. Old school way of thinking's out the window now.
Yeah. So that was interesting. I mean, there's a lot of value to a lot of the old school stuff too.
Yeah.
But this kind of changed things a little bit and brought it into a more holistic approach to general preparation and to preparing athletes.
Right on. That's awesome. Now, you also started Iron Athlete Clinic. So tell me a little bit about that and what your goal is with that.
Okay. Yeah. Iron Athlete's basically an educational company. We teach clinics in weightlifting, gymnastics, rowing. We have several others that we'll teach clinics in. But that started because I was teaching weightlifting clinics around the state at different gyms. And I didn't really have a proper name for it. It was kind of the East Valley CrossFit Weightlifting Clinic or something.
Okay.
But I figured people may not want to have another gym come into their gym and teach weightlifting clinics. So I separated the two and came up with the name Iron Athlete,
Okay.
which seems to be an appropriate fit for what we're doing.
Yeah.
So that's how Iron Athlete came about. And then we made our weightlifting team we put that under the banner of Iron Athlete.
Okay.
So they're both housed in the same place, run by the same guy, but it's two separate things.
For sure. What was the reason that you wanted to go out and teach that? Just passion? Was it something that like you saw it done poorly in a lot of places, or?
Well, what created that opportunity was the increased interest in CrossFit, because all of a sudden there's a huge influx of people that are interested in learning weightlifting, and there weren't that many people doing it before.
Okay.
I think in 2000 or 2001, when I did my USA Weightlifting Level 1, there was 2,000 members of USA Weightlifting.
Okay.
So there just weren't many people doing it.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of people now interested in it, and not enough people to meet that need or meet that demand for learning weightlifting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty much what created the opportunity to start doing the clinics. I thought it was enjoyable. It was a good way to make a little extra money, and it was fun.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and it spread the sport. Got a lot more people interested and involved in it, and having some basic knowledge of it, which I think over the long term, CrossFit bringing all these people exposure to weightlifting will benefit weightlifting, and that people won't be afraid of it.
Mm-hmm.
People will be familiar with it, so they can introduce their kids to it, or they can at least not be scared when their kid says they want to try weightlifting.
Yeah, that's fair.
Realistically, if you look at the rates of injury, it's one of the safest sports that you can participate in.
Yeah.
Sports that people think are safe, basketball, soccer, actually have much higher rates of injury.
Okay.
So a lot of it's perception.
Yeah, right on. That's awesome. How did you become president of Arizona Weightlifting?
That was just kind of filling a void that needed to be filled. We needed to get the federation a little bit more up to speed as far as having a functioning website, having a little bit more as far as organizing state meets on a large scale, doing social media stuff. So there was just an opportunity to step in for that, and I figured that would be a good thing to do to help grow the sport and good experience.
Yeah. Awesome. So, I mean, obviously a passion for strength training, you definitely have that for sure.
Yeah, I'd say just strength training in general.
Yeah.
I like a lot, actually training. I mean, I enjoy all different types of training.
Yeah.
Running, lifting, all different stuff.
Yeah, awesome. One of the reasons I wanted to chat with you and bring you on the podcast was, one, your background, obviously, and then what you just went over. And two, when I went onto the Iron Athlete Clinic and read some of the blog articles that you wrote, I really liked the way you go and approach training as a whole. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what your philosophy is when you're approaching training, what's important to pay attention to, and kind of how you approach training in general?
To step back and take like just a general statement on training philosophy would be that you should train in a way that's appropriate to your purpose. So in other words, train to what you're trying to achieve. So your training is going to look very different if you're trying to do different things. So, if you're training for weightlifting, it's going to look very different than if you're training for bodybuilding, which is going to look different if you're training CrossFit, which is going to look different if you're training to run. So it's finding an appropriate way to train for the activity that you're training for. And then once you get inside of each of those activities, then you get into a whole other debate of different ways of training for that specific activity.
Right. And you seem to do a great job with combining different thoughts of training. And this probably goes back to what you mentioned, your background, where a lot of the old school way of thinking and how everything was very compartmentalized, can actually expand out. And you seem to do a great job with utilizing some tactics from one sport to another.
That's just kind of intellectually stimulating to look at it and try and apply methodologies that people are using in one realm to another one. So using some of the principles that people have long, used for a long period of time in bodybuilding, and then looking at those and saying, well, how can we apply that to CrossFit? Mm-hmm. So one example of that be something like pre-exhaustion. One way of doing pre-exhaustion is to do a single joint movement for the exercise preceding doing it on a multiple joint. So maybe you do a pullover and then you do bar muscle ups.
Okay.
Just to pre-exhaust it. So you are hitting the lats, those muscles harder, and so that you're having to do that movement in a fatigued state and you're making that fatigue specific to that activity.
Okay.
More generally, you could just be pre-exhausted by, if you rode or ran or something like that and then did, which is very common in CrossFit.
Right.
Especially with the the lifting piece of it. Almost never at regionals or at the games did you get to lift totally fresh. Mm-hmm. You almost never got to, you get to go do a max snatch. You got 10 minutes, take your time. Usually it was, all right, you got to walk on your hands for 200 feet.
Yeah.
And then you go over and you have 3 minutes to max a snatch.
Okay.
So it forces you to think about different ways to train because the task is so different than it traditionally was.
Okay.
So that part of it's enjoyable. It's stimulating, and it always kind of kept the new challenges coming.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Just going to pre-exhaustion, is it more of a challenge to do that? Or like the reason for having pre-exhaustion like that, is it more challenging, or is there like a physiological purpose of having that as well?
Well, physiologically, it will be more challenging if you pre-exhaust some of the key movers and then do the movement.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Following it. So if you're doing a bar muscle up, so you're hanging below the bar and go up and kipping up above the bar, lats are going to be one of the prime movers in that. And if you pre-exhaust them, then you're making it so they're having to work in a fatigue state, and you have to make your movement efficient, maybe even more efficient in order to be able to accomplish it. And it should make it so that you have a higher work capacity when you get to do those without pre-exhausting the lats.
Okay.
So that's kind of the concept behind it. Is in bodybuilding, it was used because you want to pre-exhaust the muscle that you're targeting. So, and you want to do that so that the weaker muscle groups surrounding it in a multiple joint exercise aren't what limit it. Mm-hmm. So you may do a single joint exercise like a pullover to pre-exhaust your lat and then go immediately to a front pull down, a lat pull down. And the reason you would do that is because when you're doing a lat pull down, the idea is that your biceps are the smaller muscle group. They're going to fatigue prior to the lats being fatigued or fully fatigued. So if you pre-exhaust the lats, you're getting them tired. So then they get worked into a deeper state of fatigue because the biceps aren't as much of the limiting factor.
Right. Okay. That's cool. That's a really cool concept. Yeah.
So that's kind of in a nutshell pre-exhaustion.
Yeah.
Which I enjoy using it. I mean, it's, if you're training purely for strength, probably don't need to mess with it too much. Mm-hmm. But for hypertrophy or for muscular endurance or something like that, it can be very useful.
Okay.
And it just keeps it interesting. It's variety.
Yeah, for sure. So in pre-exhaustion would be a type of methodology that you can use when you're strength training.
Yes.
Okay. So what are some other methodologies that that you can talk about briefly?
Things that we pull from the bodybuilding world, obviously, a lot of what CrossFit is you could also kind of almost call supersets.
Mhm.
To me, supersets are just pairing two exercises successfully with no rest or very little rest. And often that would be antagonistic muscle groups, so a push and a pull.
Okay.
So that might be like a bench and a row if you're doing bodybuilding. For CrossFit, that could be like a thruster and a pull-up. It's kind of like a full body
Okay.
superset. So that kind of is the application of a bodybuilding concept to CrossFit.
Okay.
I like different things like trisets. Triset just means you're pairing 3 exercises and doing them in succession with little or no rest.
Okay.
Again, you see a lot of workouts in CrossFit that you could call a triset.
Yeah.
So you can mix those up tons of different ways. I have a couple articles on trisets, and one of them really just talks about the variables and how you can manipulate them to change the effect of the triset.
Nice. Right on. Okay. So you talked about pre-exhaustion, trisets,
Supersets.
any other methodologies?
I mean, there's just an infinite number of things you can talk about in that realm. If you're training for your Olympic lifts, you can apply a lot of weightlifting methodology to Olympic lifting. You can use some powerlifting stuff. If you're doing strength, you can pull some interval work from different endurance athletes. So it's getting to mix all those methodologies and then figure out how much you have to alter it in order to mix them.
Okay.
Because obviously you can't put a pure weightlifting program and pair that up with a pure 5K training program.
Yeah.
Because each one of those programs is designed to stand independently, and it's probably going to push you to about your limit of training capacity and recovery ability.
Okay.
So if you pair them up, you're going to most likely exceed your ability to recover, and you're probably not going to enjoy training for long.
Yeah, that's fair.
Then you have to modify those to be able to pair them up or fit them together.
Okay.
And there's whole lots of different details to figuring that out.
Okay. One of the things that we mentioned earlier was is training for what your desired purpose is or your desired outcome. There's so many different ways to strength train. So you have, you've mentioned bodybuilding, CrossFit, regular weightlifting. You have Olympic lifting, stuff like that. Can you kind of talk about just some of the general differences between those and
sure.
maybe other outcomes that you see people look for?
Absolutely. I think that's really important to address kind of up front when you're having a conversation about strength training is what is the terminology? What do the different names mean?
Yeah.
So you have bodybuilding, weightlifting, powerlifting, strongman. Those are kind of your big strength sports. They're each very different. If you look at them from the perspective of each other, they're almost not related. If you look from the outside and say, yeah, they're all doing strength training, but internally they're very, very different. So bodybuilding is training basically for aesthetics for a show. That'll be training for hypertrophy, size, and symmetry, and all the things that go into preparation for a bodybuilding show. Powerlifting is going to be training to see how much you can do for a 1 rep max on a squat, a bench, and a deadlift.
Okay.
Weightlifting or Olympic weightlifting is going to be training for a 1 rep max in the snatch and the clean and jerk. And then strongman, they face a variety of different tasks, loading stones, flipping tires, carrying objects, all different tests that they can face that vary from competition to competition.
Okay.
Similar to how you would have varied tests in CrossFit competition.
Okay. And then those are all those are all like pure strength training. And then you also have like CrossFit, different things like that as well that you've seen.
Yeah, CrossFit falls into, it's at a competitive level, it's a strength sport.
Right.
It's strength and conditioning. But the competitive high-level CrossFit athletes have very high levels of strength as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you definitely have to strength train to be competitive in CrossFit, and just generally for overall fitness, health, ability to perform tasks, you need to strength train.
Yeah.
And so I think CrossFit addresses that probably the most effectively, because each one of the strength sports, the means or the ends of that training methodology is performance in that sport. And so the training matches up to performing that task.
Mm-hmm.
And that task is pretty siloed off into one little realm.
Okay.
Bodybuilding is the appearance on stage.
Right.
Olympic lifting is the snatch and the clean and jerk. Powerlifting is the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. So it's really siloed off. You're very specialized. CrossFit is much more of a general approach.
Okay.
Where you have to be conditioned, you have to be able to do gymnastics, and you still have to be strong.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's much more of a general preparation and generalized approach to training.
Okay. you have a few different articles that you've written on the use of free weights versus machines. Can you kind of talk to us about your philosophy on that aspect? Is one better than the other? Sometimes people look at machines as like that's not real strength training and stuff like that. Can you speak to some of that?
That can be a fairly controversial topic.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at training methodologies and training modalities as tools, and each of them are going to have areas that they're well suited for, and in other areas where they're probably not as effective. I think machines have a place in a lot of different training purposes. They have a place in it. You can use them to develop people's strength for gymnastics. You can use them to develop muscular endurance or to address imbalances. You can use them to deload the athlete. So if they've been doing a lot of muscle ups and handstand push-ups and stressful upper body movements, you can stimulate the body still in a very similar way without those levels of stress. Because a muscle up, you're going to create a lot more force and impact on the joints than you will if you're just doing a dip on the machine and a pull down and doing those in a moderate way. So they can be used in that way as well. I like using them to warm up the upper body, or just generally to warm up, to prepare for a gymnastics session. You can also mix them into the sessions where maybe we do our strength work, then we'll do our gymnastics work, then we come back and do some muscular endurance work with machines where we're doing trisets. So if we're trying to build muscular endurance in the back, maybe we do a pull down, a pull over, and a seated row in succession, and we were really hammering those muscles and we're hammering from different angles. The other thing that hitting them from the different angles allows for is you can train at a very high volume with a lower risk of getting an overuse injury.
Okay.
You're moving in different planes. So if I'm doing, let's say I want to do 9 sets for my back, I can do 9 sets of pull-ups where it's all in the same plane, all the same movement. And that's going to probably have a higher likelihood of getting some type of overuse injury in the elbow or shoulder. Or I can do, 3 sets on a pull down, 3 sets on a row, 3 sets on a pullover.
Okay.
And I still did 9 sets for my back, but I did it from 3 different angles and in 3 different movement patterns. So that should decrease the odds of having an overuse injury.
Right.
And it may help with getting more balanced development too.
Okay.
Now, if you're competing solely in pull-ups, you need to do a lot of pull-ups. But if they're a tool to train your back, then maybe you can split it up different ways. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. I mean, if you're going to train for Olympic weightlifting, you should primarily Olympic weightlift.
Yeah.
And that's going to be with a barbell.
Right.
If you're powerlifting, primarily you need to do the powerlifting and directly, very closely related free weight movements. You can use machines in both those activities, but they're not going to be the focus of the program.
Okay.
Bodybuilders still tend to use free weights for a lot of the larger the compound movements, and then use machines to isolate or hit specific movements or do finishing movements, or supersets, different pre-exhaustion. There are some exercises where machines are probably a superior way of doing the exercise, but you probably have a tough time making that argument about very many exercises.
Okay, that's fair.
So a pullover, for example, like if you're laying on a bench doing a dumbbell or barbell pullover, the range of motion that you're getting resistance against the weight is going to be much smaller than the range of motion you get on a machine.
Okay.
Because if I'm laying on my back, once I've pulled my arms so that they're perpendicular to the ground, my lats are deloaded.
Okay.
Whereas if I have a machine, I can get resistance in my lats all the way until my upper arm is back, pointing straight down to the ground by my side.
Okay.
So it really increases the range of motion you can work.
Okay.
So there's a few examples like that. But generally for sport preparation and things like that, free weights are probably going to be preferable and more beneficial because you're having to control them. I think one of the things that you can do with free weights that benefits, particularly contact sports, is doing things like power cleans and squats where you're physically interacting with the barbell in space.
Yeah.
Because when you do a 300-pound power clean and you catch it on your shoulders, your body is absorbing that impact of 300 pounds that's moving.
Right.
There's very few other ways to prepare your body to absorb that kind of force than doing that type of lifting.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And when you tackle someone, you're having a similar force.
Yeah, that's essentially what's happening.
So it prepares your body better to absorb those forces, which is hard to do any other way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's kind of a surface look at kind of the debate on the machines versus
Yeah.
free weights. And you could say derogatory things about either one of them, but
Right.
I think they're both very effective in their place, and I enjoy both of them.
Yeah, and like you said, at the end of the day, they're tools, and so you use the tools based on the outcomes that you're going for and different things like that.
Exactly. And if you don't have, one of the big things that people lose sight of is if you don't have a specific measure, a performance measure at the end of your training, you don't have to train in a rigid fashion.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not going to do a weightlifting meet, you don't need to train purely like a weightlifter, because you're not getting tested on your performance as a weightlifter.
Right.
You can use weightlifting to improve your health, improve your bone density, connective tissue, metabolism, all those things. But you don't have to strictly stick to exactly how a weightlifter would train, because you don't have that performance measure at the end.
Right.
That's kind of how I view the difference between training CrossFit competitors and general CrossFit. CrossFit competitors, you have an end game. You have an outcome that you have to accomplish, and there's going to be a task that you have to be prepared for. You don't know exactly what that task is going to be, but you can look at all the information that's out there and get a general idea of what the requirements are going to be for them to be able to successfully compete in that. In general CrossFit training, there's not a test.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the people in general CrossFit are training for health. They're training to make their quality of life better. They're training for enjoyment.
Yeah.
So you can make it varied. It doesn't have to be as systematic or as structured to get a specific adaptation, and you don't have to hit the same things as frequently.
Mm.
So like if you want to be a competitive CrossFitter, you've got to be good at muscle ups and snatches. A regular CrossFitter would be fine not doing those things. You can be very fit, happy, and healthy and never done a snatch or muscle up in your life.
Right.
But if you want to be a competitive CrossFitter, you better be pretty good at them.
Yeah.
So those are complex. There's a big learning curve on them.
Yeah.
They're stressful on your body. They're really cool and they're enjoyable. But a lot of people either aren't in a place physiologically or with their time commitment that they can put the time or capability into learning those movements.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need to.
Yeah.
They can still get the benefit from that training methodology without training like it's a sport.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And like you said, it all goes back to outcomes. So are you choosing to be competitive? Or are you choosing just to do it so you can like play with your kids on the weekend?
Yes.
What's
your purpose?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's, I think, a part that a lot of people bypass when they're determining how they're going to train or what their methodology is going to be.
Right.
Is they skip past the part where they identify, why am I doing this? What's my purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And then what meets that purpose? What provides me with what I need to accomplish what I'm setting out to accomplish?
Yeah.
And that can cause a lot of unhappiness too, because they'll compare themselves to other athletes or they'll compare themselves to performance standards that have nothing to do with the outcome they're trying to get.
Yeah.
So, if you're not training to be a competitive CrossFitter, you can have getting a muscle up as a goal, and it can be something that's fun and gives you something to work towards and focus on it. But there's nothing on the line.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a performance measure.
Right.
It's something that you want to do for the fun of doing it. And really, there's not a need for you to do it outside of you being interested in being able to do it.
No, absolutely. You've been around, you obviously own East Valley CrossFit here in Chandler, and you've been around so many different people that have come to you to either be coached, to strength train, different things like that. And you've seen everyone from competitive people to, just the person that wants to be healthy. I'm sure you've heard a number of reasons why people want to be healthy. What are some of the favorite ones that you've heard?
Well, people have a lot of different reasons for exercising or for training or for doing CrossFit.
Yeah.
That's changed for us over the years. When I first started, we were in my garage and it was just people that just wanted to be fit for quality of life, for longevity,
mm-hmm.
Exercise for enjoyment.
Yeah.
And then as we got more serious, team go to the games, did regionals 6 years in a row and all that stuff. A lot of the people that were here to train as competitive athletes.
Okay.
And that's a different purpose and it's a different way of training.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose there is very measurable. It's an achievement of, I went to regionals or I went to the games or I was able to perform at this level. And when you do that, you have to train in a very specific way to accomplish those things. And you're training for a different reason. And I think long-term, it's probably not as beneficial reason to train because you're training for a specific outcome. The shelf life of someone training that way is typically going to be pretty short.
Right.
You're going to be better off training in a way that you enjoy, that adds to the quality of your life, that's not overly disruptive to your life. So if you're training to be a CrossFit competitor and you're committing 2 or 3 hours a day to training and you're making it so that you have to spend a lot of time eating and recovering.
Mhm.
That's not sustainable long term.
Right.
It's enjoyable and fun when you're doing it.
Yeah.
And it is how you have to train to accomplish the certain things you set out to accomplish. But it's very different than if you're training for longevity or you're training as a lifestyle.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I think we went over all the stuff I wanted to cover in this episode. In the next few episodes, I think we'll go and talk about if you chose to go into bodybuilding or CrossFit or weight, like what do you call it? Any of the different types. We can go and talk about in each episode a little bit more in detail of how do you do that properly? What are the outcomes that you're looking for in each one, and kind of compare and contrast some of those. I think we covered a lot of good information today. Do you want to add anything else to the episode today?
I think we got quite a bit in there.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed talking to you. Appreciate you having me on, and look forward to doing future shows.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, August, thank you so much for being on the show. Hope you all enjoyed it. We'll catch you on the next episode.